Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a review for In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. This is a memoir that tells the story of a girl who grew up in and eventually escaped North Korea. Up until the age of 13, Yeonmi and her family lived in North Korea. They started out fairly prosperous by North Korean standards until her father, who was involved in smuggling, eventually was caught and sent to prison. At that point, her and her family went into poverty, intense poverty and starvation, and when she was 13, they escaped across the border into China. She weighed only about 60 pounds at the time and had had her appendix out just days prior. And when she arrived in China, she and her mother, who escaped together, were trafficked into sex slavery. Eventually, she and her mother and her sister all made their way to South Korea, where now she lives as a human rights activist. I gave this book 4 stars and thought it was absolutely stunning. This is one of those books that I just want to highly recommend to everyone. And it's also one of those reviews where I feel like I really need to stress that for me to give a book 5 stars, it has to not only be an amazing book, but it has to be a favorite for me. I've only given out 3 5-star ratings prior this year, so the fact that this is 4 stars is not really a point against it, because it was a book that I really considered giving 5 stars. And honestly, I'm still not sure that it didn't deserve it, because it was just amazing. It's a really easy read. Sometimes with memoirs that take place in countries that we're not that familiar with, they can be difficult. But this really felt like she was writing it in order to inform people. The language was very simple and it flowed really easily. It took me about a day to read this, and it was on Christmas. I started it about 3 a.m. Christmas morning when I couldn't fall asleep, and then continued it throughout the day whenever I had time. And I wasn't sitting down and reading it for hours. It'd be a couple of chapters here, 30 pages there, and I managed to finish it that evening. It was just really fast. I flew through it, and honestly, I learned so much. I genuinely had no idea that the number of North Koreans who now live in South Korea is 26,000. I don't know what I thought it was, but significantly less than that. And I do have a general knowledge of human trafficking and how it works, so I don't know why I was so shocked by that high number. And that's just in South Korea. That doesn't include the North Koreans who've escaped to China and haven't officially registered anywhere, because China doesn't accept North Koreans as refugees. It's just not something we hear about very much in America. We hear about the occasional North Korean escaping, usually when there's a big dramatic event around it, like if they're sprinting across the border while being shot at. We hear about that, but just in general, the fact that there are 26,000 North Koreans was just kind of astounding to me. It's just a heartbreaking story, starting from her childhood, where she really had no concept of freedom. She worshipped Kim Jong-il, as well as his father. They were her literal gods. And her family did as well, especially her mother. And when they eventually fell on harder times and were literally starving and had nothing to eat, and she was only 60 pounds when she crossed the border, it was so heartbreaking to hear her talk about what mattered to her and how all she wanted was a bowl of rice. And it was so very small and specific, and just like one of those things that really touches your heart when you learn everything she was doing in North Korea and think she's only, 11, 12, 13 at the time, sometimes even younger for the first part of the story. And especially for me, because I looked her up and she's only about, I determined she's about 2 weeks younger than I am. That was just like kind of astounding that like not only was she going through all these difficult things, but she was going through them at the same time I was, in 3rd grade. She'd be a 3rd grader in North Korea, same age as me, dealing with all these hardships. And that was really heartbreaking, like just to be able to relate to that so much. I didn't cry while reading this, but I definitely came close a few times, and I think if you are a crier, this is probably going to be a book that makes you cry. But it just like so hard, like her entire life, and even when she got to South Korea, dealing with the prejudice they have against North Koreans and the prejudice she felt for having been sex trafficked in China and the shame from that. It's so emotional. It's also very interesting to me that I've read 2 books on North Korea so far, and both of them have dealt with parallels between Christianity and North Korea. This was not quite as overt as Without You, There Is No Us, but she did run across several Christian missionary groups who helped smuggle her from China into South Korea. And the way they treated her and sort of the ideologies they had and the way they're sort of teaching her of the Christian faith was very much similar to the brainwashing she experienced in North Korea. The way they would make them write Bible verses over and over again was similar to the way they'd make them write passages about Kim Jong-il over and over again. And I felt like that was very interesting that in both the books I've read about North Korea, they've both touched on the fact that Christian extremists, and these are obviously extremists, I'm not anti-religion or anything, but it's a very interesting conversation to have when you're discussing extremists of any kind, even those who have the best intentions. She's also not as overtly negative as Suki Kim was in Without You There Is No Us. She kind of implied that she still kind of is a Christian, I believe. She wasn't really specific on it in any way, which kind of made me think she does use Christian missionary groups for some of her activism, and she doesn't want to alienate anyone. But it was very interesting that she touched on it a little bit. The main thing that kept me from giving this book 5 stars was that it felt too short. And not in the sense that, oh, it was a really good story, I want to read more of it, but it felt like it was kind of lacking in how short it was. It's only 270 pages, and it does cover everything from her childhood to escaping North Korea, to being trafficked in China, to escaping China to South Korea, to her schooling there, and now her current life in activism. And that's a lot. And it's especially a lot for only 270 pages. And I just felt like she hit on everything, she touched on everything, but I wish there had been like a little bit more substance, a little more detail, there'd been more reflection. I just felt like I really wanted and needed more from this story for it to feel full enough. I think the length coupled with how quickly you can read this book really made it feel too short and a little bit kind of bare bones almost. But overall, I just really think this was a book that could have benefited from being 400 pages. I felt like I learned enough to really understand her story, but I wanted more than just enough. I wanted more than the bare minimum. I wanted 400 pages of this book to really fully grasp it. I also think this is a book that people who don't really tend to like memoirs might like. It's not really a memoir in the sense that she's telling a specific story of her life. She's not focusing on something that's wholly subjective. It does read more like an autobiography almost. She's telling you the facts of her life. She's telling you everything from birth until current, which she's about 25, I believe, because she's my age. It feels like she wrote this not to tell her story, but to be informative, because I don't know her reasons for writing this book. She does touch on them briefly, but if she said that she felt obligated to write this book in order to inform people of human rights issues, and specifically in North Korea, I would believe her. This does feel like it's a book that's meant to be informative. It's meant to teach you about a thing. It's meant to make you understand. It's not specifically her story. She's writing this story for every North Korean. She's writing this so that people understand and people might help. People might be inspired to do something, or at the very least, support her human rights activism. It really didn't come across like she was writing this for her. She was definitely writing it to inform people, and I think she was very successful in that endeavor, for me at least. I felt like I learned so much from this book, and I gained so much from this book. If you're interested in North Korea, if you want to learn more about North Korea, I think this is a must-read. I haven't read that much on the subject, but based on what little I know, and my feelings after this book, I highly recommend this. I can't recommend this enough. If you have any interest at all in North Korea, I'd really like for you to pick up this book. I came away feeling like I learned so much more than Without You There Is No Us, which I did come away learning from, but this gave me a much better understanding of North Korea. This was just an absolutely amazing book, and I gave it 4 stars, but it's one of those I still have thought about giving it 5 stars. But I think I'm going to leave it where it is. It obviously touches on a lot of difficult subject matters. Her mother is raped in front of her. She is raped as a 13-year-old child. And even when she gets to South Korea, everything bad that's happened to her doesn't stop. But if you can read this, if you're up to that kind of difficult subject matter, I would really highly recommend it. I can't stress enough how important I think this book is, and how informative it is, and just how much I gained overall from having read this book. Please let me know down below if you've read this book and what you thought of it. If you have, I'd love to have conversations in the comments section, because I really do think this is an important book. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.